Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us tonight, and to those at home joining us online for this evening's Audit and Standards meeting for November. Where's the year gone? Thank you everyone for your attendance. It's a packed hall today. We've got lots and lots of different officers for lots of different reports, so thank you all for being here for those. Item 1, announcements. Obviously to advise that the meeting, the procedures followed by the Members Committee. The fire drill is not expected this evening, so if an alarm does sound, please evacuate the building quickly and calmly. Use the stairs and not the lifts. And once out of the building, please gather outside Virgin Money, which is the former Yorkshire Bank, on the opposite side of the road. As everyone's here as regulars, you will know standard green fire signs for evacuating. Can I ask please that all mobile phones are set to turned off or silent, and also to advise that this meeting is being recorded and live streamed for future broadcast as well on the Council's website, YouTube page and other social media areas. Item number 2, apologies. We have no apologies. Item number 3, the minutes of the meeting held on the 28th of September. I have those proposed. Councillor Kenner? Oh, sorry. Councillor Kenner, jumping in there. Propose that they be signed. Is there a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Kenner. Any dissent to those being signed? No. They are therefore will be signed. Thank you, everybody. On to agenda item number 4, the declarations of interest. They are printed as on the agenda. Anybody have anything at this stage, anything to add? No, just to note that all members tonight are full members, and therefore they are all printed as per the agenda. We've got no substitutes, which is why we normally sometimes have others to be added. Number 5, public consultation. I have no public speakers down for this evening, so we will take each item in turn. It may be that we have to adjust the order later on, depending on how quick things go, to enable an officer to have to get back for the last train. So just a heads up for that one. But if that changes, obviously we will move that at the right time. So the first substantive item, which is on our agenda item, is agenda item number 6 on page 12. The report from external auditors, Grant Thornton. And I think Grant is going to start for us. Grant.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. What you've got in front of you today is our annual audit letter for the 2019-2020 audit, and it is the final report from us in terms of concluding our work on that audit. I'm not going to take you through the letter today. I'm going to hand over to Will Guest, the manager, who's going to take members through the annual audit letter.
Thank you, Will. Thank you.
Thank you. So, as Grant said, the letter is intended to provide a commentary on the results of the work to the Council and external stakeholders, and to highlight any issues that we wish to draw the attention to of the public. We do not identify any matters that require us to exercise our additional statutory powers in respect of the 2019-20 financial year, and we are in the process of finalising our work on an objection raised in the prior year in respect of the Council's arrangements for setting car parking charges. We do note that new charges were set in July 2021, with arrangements taken into account interim feedback from our work in that area. So if you could please turn to page 5. This page sets out the reasons for the audit being concluded later than November 2020, which was the statutory deadline. So the main reasons for these are that working papers were not always provided in a timely manner. There was also an increased focus for 1920 on the property, plant and equipment valuations and the level of detail that we need to go into for these. Now, that level of detail is going to continue into 2020-2021, and so it's important that we get that information back as soon as we can for this year's audit to avoid delays for that opinion. Another reason why the audit is later than the statutory deadline is due to a key person risk. So a lot of our requests, a lot of the working papers, and generally a lot of the work on the accounts all goes through one person within the council. So that creates a lot of work for that individual. It means that all our questions have to go through that person and we have to wait for those responses. And again, that is something that will continue to impact the 2020-2021 audit. And we did recommend in our audit findings report that the council review their arrangements for creating the accounts and the working papers that go along with that and the answers to our queries. So if I can now turn you to page 6. Some of the members that were on the committee in March will remember that we presented the audit findings report, and within there were our detailed findings. So on those findings we reported them next to our significant risks, and the first significant risk that we identified was COVID-19. So the audit's been more challenging last year for both us and the finance team due to remote working and the additional strain on both us and the finance team. There were material uncertainties as well to consider for the property, plant and equipment valuations and also the pension liability. And there were also some disclosures that were updated within the financial statements to reflect the impact of COVID-19. If we now move to page 7, that sets out the next significant risk, which is management override of control. So this relates to journals mainly. So we did identify that 2 users have super user access. Now, whilst from a practical point of view, it is a very useful tool for the council to be able to assist sort of their colleagues in various areas on the ledger, it does pose some issues that the super user could be acting on someone else's account without that other person potentially knowing. So that sort of impacts the audit trail that we then have, and it will continue to affect again the 2021 audit. Then we also talk on this page about fraud in revenue recognition. So we didn't consider this to be a significant risk for Nuneaton, and our testing that we did in this area didn't change our view. Page 8 then sets out the valuation of land and buildings. So with regard to council dwellings, we identified 4 cases where properties were in the wrong beacon. So council dwellings are valued on a beacon basis, which means that if a house is in a sort of set criteria, it might be that it's a 3-bedroom house in a particular area. We identified that there were 4 cases where they were in the wrong beacon, which meant they had the wrong value attached. Now, our expected error for this was 341k, so it's not material. We also recommended that the detail in the values report is improved for future years, and that will be something which we will come to looking at in the coming weeks as we are on the 2021 audit. Within the land and buildings valuation, we identified that there was an impairment of 1.2 million in relation to the council house. Now, this impairment was to reflect additions made to the council house that actually didn't impact the value of the council house. However, the valuer thought that the value of the council house had gone up, and therefore that impairment shouldn't be there. So that was removed from the accounts. And then there was also a transposition error for 1 property of £600,000, which was corrected in the financial statements. And as I've mentioned earlier, there was a material uncertainty on the valuation for property, plant and equipment valuations. So that was included in the accounts and also referred to in an emphasis of matter paragraph within our opinion. So if we please turn to page 9. With regard to the estimate of pension assets and liabilities, our audit work didn't identify any issues in this area. But again, there is a material uncertainty on the valuation placed on this, and that is referred to in an emphasis of matter in our audit opinion again. So I'll quickly take you through the other areas in our report, and then I'll give you a brief update on the 2021 audit as it stands. So page 10 sets out our work on value for money, and we are satisfied in all respects that the council put in place proper arrangements to secure economy, efficiency and effectiveness in its use of resources for the year ending 31st of March 2020. Page 12 then sets out the actual audit fee for the 1920 financial statements audit. So this is further broken down on page 13, and this has been agreed with Stephen Fitzgerald, but it does still need to go through PSA approval. So we're still waiting for that. That's that. So that's the annual audit letter. I suppose I just want to give an update on the 2021 audit as that kicked off a couple of weeks ago. So we're just starting the 3rd week of that audit now. And again, as I mentioned earlier, it's important that we get the working papers that we need to do our work in a timely manner. So we're setting deadlines with the finance team and the valuer to ensure that we hit those deadlines, and we're monitoring it very closely. The important things for us are, again, that evidence around property, plant and equipment valuations. The level of scrutiny that we have to go into on property, plant and equipment valuations isn't going away, and it's going to remain. And we need to make sure that the evidence we get is sufficient for our needs, because there will be levels of challenge that go beyond, and it really is the data behind that. Now, we do appreciate that the council have sought external valuers this year, which is a change from last year. So there's the district valuer, Savills, and then the internal valuer as well. But it all still comes back to that underlying data in their calculations that we need to make sure we get back. We're aiming to get samples completely done this week, and that then will rely on the council's officers coming back to us with the supporting evidence. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Will and Grant. Was there anything, Craig, you want to come back on at this stage? Yeah, I think just before we go off into the committee, Craig just wanted to give a little bit of feedback on some of the elements that have been raised. Craig.
Thank you very much, Chair. Yeah, it's a very constructive report, and obviously we've had lessons learned from last year's audit, and yes, it didn't go as well as we could have anticipated it to go. What we've done this year, liaising myself with Will, is being on site. Last year was very, very difficult through COVID, that it was a fully remote audit, and what we've agreed is that we will have on-site audit as much as possible, so I can have regular liaison meetings with Grant Thornton. Will's already said about the valuations, and because of lack of capacity and making sure we'd actually got professional opinions, we've actually used Savills to do our dwellings this year, and the district valuer to do a lot of our specialised assets, so we've actually spread the load wider. The journals and super users one it's not an issue as far as I'm concerned, because the risk would remain whoever was a super user. We think we've got the controls in place, and yes, it is a risk, and it's a risk that we're going to have to work with. The other thing I would say is I'm grateful for the support that our interim director of finance, he has taken some of the pressures off me, so I can focus on the audit work. So hopefully we can get this audit concluded as quickly as possible, so we can bring it back to the January meeting. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Craig. So to enable debate, move that we note the report. Is there a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Kenner. Any member wish to speak? Councillor Conacher.
Thank you very much, Chair. A couple of things caught my attention. One was the Gresham Road valuation, which was either 1.1 or 1.7 million pounds. That seemed rather low, because it was a £1 million purchase and about £2 million spent on fitting it out and converting it for our needs. So it would be useful if you could just clarify if that's a building, or the building and all the fit out, and what sort of valuation that is effectively. And the second point was on your valuation, your value for money. You talk about the refresh of the medium-term financial plan, and you really sort of raise a flag about it needing to be robust, etc. So it would be useful to know how you're checking that as it's developed effectively. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair. I will have at this point, I can't remember, going back to the file, I can't remember in terms of the depot whether it covers both land and the buildings. I think the issue we identified was, I think through our work, we're satisfied with the valuation assumptions behind that, but that was a transposition error, effectively. So we picked up the fact of the value in the valuation report, I think it was 1.7 instead of, or should have been 1.27, it was 1.7. So I'd need to come back and clarify, Councillor. I believe it did counsel both buildings and land. In terms of the valuation, in terms of expenditure, sometimes the expenditure will not always add value necessarily, and that's where we talk about those impairments that come through, and in terms of the valuation process. And I suppose last year as well, and I have to admit this, we're looking back effectively to March 2020. There was the impact of the pandemic around those material uncertainties around those valuations. and it will be picked up again as part of this year's audit. So I'm happy to come back and just clarify exactly what the valuation was in relation to that, and as officers have the answer to hand. I just need to check before that. So, but our primary was actually looking at a valuation report. We were satisfied with what the value had done and the assumptions underpinning that. The error we'd identified was a simple transposition error in terms of translating that figure out of the valuation report and into the accounts. Yeah, in respect of value for money, yes, I mean, it does continue to be a pressure for not just Nuneaton, but for other councils in respect of the impact of the pandemic on income flows, and therefore, and in terms of income and expenditure, and in terms of setting budgets overall. It is something we're picking up as part of this year's value for money, and we've already had preliminary discussions with the interim, I suppose, Section 151 officer, Stephen Fitzgerald, around the budgeting for next year as well. So we will be picking up on that in terms of where we believe the council is overall, in terms of an independent view on that. I think at the moment our understanding would be it's in a challenging but manageable position. But then that is similar to other authorities, but we haven't finalised our work for this year on that, and that's why we asked about refreshing, or recommended it gets refreshed. My understanding is that it's being picked up now as part of and it will go and feed into the 22-23 budget setting, and that will clearly be driven by once the final detailed figures come out of the CSR that's just come out of this year's budget as well, where we understand that I think generally across the piece, whilst I think the settlement was probably better than people were expecting, it's still going to leave challenges for the sector as a whole in relation to that. So it's still on our radar. It'll get picked up more when we report back to you in January around our value for money work as well, around the 2021 work. But there'll also be a little element of in that. We'll look at 22, 23 going forward as well.
Thank you, Grant. Stephen Fitzgerald, our interim Section 151 officer, wants to come in on this as well. Stephen.
Yes, very briefly. I think Grant has, and good evening, members. I think it's the first time some of us have met. I'm Steve Fitzgerald, and I'm interim director of finance and Section 151 officer here. I think the journey we're going through in the terms of the refresher for financial strategy, Grant is absolutely right. We have the annual local authority finance settlement, which in recent years has been traditionally announced shortly before Christmas. That will perhaps have a material effect on our budgetary position. And in the light of that, we will be looking at the overall financial strategy with a view to presenting it to council when we set the council tax in February. So that's the journey that we would plan to go on in that, and make the best decisions that we can in the light of all the relevant factors when that announcement is made by the Secretary of State for levelling up housing and communities.
Thank you. Any other member? No. It's been proposed and seconded that we note the report from Grant Thornton. Is there any dissent? No. Well, thank you very much. The report is noted. Thank you very much, gentlemen. The obviously usual. If you need to go, please do, or feel free to stay. You're very welcome for either. So
I think we're going to stay for the time being. Thank you.
Thank you very much. On to agenda item number 7, which is the Treasury Management Monitoring Quarter 2 21-22 report for Craig. Craig.
Thank you very much, Chair. Usual format of the report. Just a few points I will bring out from that. The economic summary and the outlook at sections 3 and 4 highlighted that even back at the end of Q2, inflation was considered a risk. You no doubt have seen in the media that inflation is very high at the moment, so much so that the Monetary Policy Committee of the Bank of England are actually forecasting inflation to be a significant risk going forward, with a view that it might even hit 5% next April. And so the Monetary Policy Committee will be looking to take action at some point and increasing the bank rate to try and combat that. An interest rate forecast that's actually come out today suggests that it could be as soon as next month. Whereas obviously what we've got in this report that it is going to be in Q2 of 22. But obviously things have moved on since then. The table at 5.4 shows our investment position and our debt portfolio. Debt portfolio has not changed, but investments have risen dramatically, as we'd expect. But there is a large balance being held at the end of Q2 in money market funds, and that was primarily because of market appetite in taking short-dated money. What we didn't want to do is put money out for long periods over 6 months to 12 months because we were expecting the markets to move, and there was no appetite from the likes of banks and building societies for very short-dated investments. So the use of money market funds, being AAA rated as well and very secure and liquid, was the best opportunity for us. Moving on, the property fund, a table at 518. There's some very good news in that it is now seeing strong capital growth over the first 2 quarters of this financial year, which have more than reversed the shock, negative impact that we saw with Brexit and COVID. The yield against the fund has dropped to 3.39, taking the year to date to 3.52. But even so, that is still way ahead of what we'd expect to get by placing money in the normal markets through banks and building societies. So we're still very comfortable with that. And as usual, I have got the normal table in there at 524 to show what the impact of the statutory override is at the present time. You'll see at 526 that there has been very, very little investment activity, because I've already mentioned about the use of money market funds, and we've only actually placed 1 certificate of deposit during the whole of the quarter because of the market's appetite for taking short-dated money. Moving over the page, there's a table at the, on 528, there's a table at the top that shows our debt holding against our capital financing requirements. And our capital financing requirement is the amount of borrowing that we've used to fund the capital programme. But our debt levels are way below that. I've always say we're in an under-borrowed position, and at the moment that's sustainable. But the final row of that table shows that if the capital programme continues as budgeted, and a lot of it is predicated on taking on new debt, that we would be under-borrowed at £49 million. So that's not sustainable because we haven't got that level of investments to fund that under-borrowed position. So there will be a need to externalise some debt at some point this year. We are in constant liaison with Link as our Treasury advisors, who give us regular updates on interest rate forecasts, including debt forecasts, and what their target borrowing is, so we can actually look and model at the best time to take debt, so we're getting it at the right time, at the right price. Section 6 is a summary of our Prudential and Treasury indicators, and there's nothing adverse to report in that. So I'm just asking for the committee to note the report, but happy to take any questions if there's anything specific to ask me. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Craig. So from the chair, we note the report. Is it seconded? Councillor Kenneth, thank you very much. Any member? Councillor Condacor.
Thank you, Chair. I noted the comments about capital financing, etc. And obviously we've got an awful lot of very big projects. When you hire a builder, obviously sometimes you pay a bit each quarter and sometimes you pay all at the end, etc. Have we forecast the hotel project and the bed and breakfast conversion sort of as cash flow wise, and does that hit us this year, or is it spread over 2 years or 3 years? Because the report's got quite a lot of nice charts, but I don't see one that's like our sort of cash flow chart, if you know what I mean, to see how the ebbs and flows of our capital projects affect our effectively the amount of debt we need to borrow, and particularly with the uncertainty we've got in the world at the moment. It would be nice to know that we had a nice steady forward view effectively of what we needed to borrow. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. The answer is yes, we do have cash flow forecasts for these projects. Working with the consultants, we do have quite a detailed timeline on a per quarter basis over the life of the construction phases, and also the timing of when grants are going to be coming in. So we can actually look at when we will need to be taking debt if these cash flows transpire as they are currently forecast. They are being constantly reviewed as contracts are being tendered and things like that, and I am in regular meetings with the consultants and the project team, so we can actually make sure we've got this model refined, and when we do need to take debt, as I said, we can take it at the right price at the right time, but also take a mix, so take some short, to maybe take some variable, maybe take some long, so we're not all putting all of our eggs, like you say, there's going to be a lot of debt being taken, Don't want to put it all in one basket, so taking it all for 50 years, not going to be on the table at all. We will be taking a mix to spread risk over the whole project.
Thank you, Craig. Councillor Condacott, follow up.
Thank you, that's very useful. It might be useful if we had a little diagram or a little paragraph in our Treasury report to actually indicate what sort of capital expenditure we were going to be having in the next year, and if it's going to be early or late. I mean, I'm not, obviously for your project planning, you've got really massively detailed charts. I was only talking of sort of bar graph of quarters or half years, just to give us an idea where we're going with this. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Mr. Sinlower. Sorry, Mr. Sinlower, that one I think is broken. If you could just use the... Yeah, if you just turn off the one in front... Yeah, that's it. And hopefully we should... Thank you. Thank you. If you just turn the mic off, sorry, it overrides them otherwise. Thank you. Craig.
Thank you very much. The net debt has come down quite dramatically because, as you've seen, our investments have gone up to 44 mil from 27 mil at 31st of March. The debt hasn't changed, so obviously the net position has reduced because of our investment balances increasing. And a lot of that is driven by the cash flows of the council, where we do get a lot of money in at the start of the year as people pay their council tax and business rates, and we get a lot of grant money coming in at the start of the year. So our cash flows increase, so our net debt will reduce because our investment's going up. But as the year progresses, we'll see those investment balances come back down as those grants and the cash flow is being used to service our day-to-day expenditure. But obviously what will happen, as I say, as the year progresses and we do end up taking on some more debt, obviously that net debt will increase because the debt levels from the current 72 mil will increase by a bit. No, that is literally just, as I say, it's the average over the first 6 months of the year, so it's not our ledger. Our ledger is the snapshot position as at a point in time, so that's the previous table.
Thank you very much. Any other member? No, thank you. It's been proposed and seconded that report be noted. Is there any dissent? No, that report stands noted. Thank you very much. Agenda item number 8, the disclosure and bar risk service check for councillors. This follows on from a request of the committee in first meeting to look at the DBS position of the council and its policy at the moment in respect of councillors. We have a briefing note was circulated by Craig Dicken, who's picked up this area for us, following a request with internal staffing adjustments. So Craig, thank you. Over to you.
Good evening all. Here to present the briefing note on disclosure and barring checks. Some of you might know commonly the abbreviation DBS as CRB checks. We're going back quite a while now. So what disclosure and barring checks is basically a mechanism to check a person's previous criminal convictions. There are 3 levels of check. There is the basic check, which basically sets out unspent convictions and conditional cautions. We've got the second level, which is standard checks, which sort of follows on from the basic and details spent, unspent convictions, cautions, final warnings and reprimands. And finally, we've got enhanced checks. And what enhanced checks are is basically to check anybody's suitability for working with children and or adults in a regulated activity. And we'll come on to regulated activity in a short while. What an enhanced check does check is everything that a standard check does, but it also includes any information that's held by the police which the employer might deem relevant to that person taking up that position, certainly with us as a council. So what we'll do now is just go on to the criteria for regulated activity for working with children, and as you'd expect, this would be such activities as teaching, supervising children, health, personal care, and childminding and foster carers. You've got the list that in the briefing note. With regulated activity for children, this needs to be done on a regular basis. So what it says here is once a week or more often, or at least 4 times in a 30-day period. And as it says there, if it's overnight, it only needs between the hours of 2 a.m. and 6 a.m. it only needs to be done once for it to be in regulated activity. Regulated activity for adults is somewhat different. Just to be clear, there is no term now. You might have heard terms years gone by of vulnerable adult. We don't generally tend to use that terminology anymore. We've sort of moved away from that, and it's an adult with care and support needs, and that can change over depending on the person's circumstances and their well-being. There are 6 categories for regulated activity for an adult. Unlike with children, you only need to do one of the activities once, which would then put you into regulated activity. So you've got healthcare for adults, you've got personal care for adults, you've got social work, you've got assistance with adults' cash bills, shopping because of various things, you've got assisting in the conduct of an adult's own affairs, and then finally you've got conveyancing for adults because of various reasons. Moving on to what the council does, we have actually got a policy in place for disclosure and barring checks covering our staff, and how this is administered within the authority. We don't have any posts that are requiring a standard check. We do have several posts which require an enhanced check. But coming on to the reason for me being here this evening is the question of DBS checks for councillors, and sort of my conclusion from this is that councillors would only be eligible for a basic check. So I'm happy to, thank you Chair, I'm happy to take any questions that anybody has.
Thank you very much, Craig, and thank you for providing that update following the request of the committee. So to enable debate and obviously questions, move that we note the report. Is there a seconder? Councillor Beetham. There we go. Thank you very much, everyone. Lots of indications there. So it's been proposed and seconded that we note the report. Any speakers? I have Councillor Downs.
Thank you, Chair. On the DBS checks, I feel it's important that councillors should be checked. Only last week, I know that several councillors went to 2 schools in Bedworth with young children, very young children. And I know we don't use the phrase anymore because it's not PC or whatever, but we do regularly come into contact with vulnerable adults, elderly, infirm. You know, I feel that as almost an extended employee of the council, as an agent of the council, I feel that we need to have these checks done, because if anybody's going out there and seeing different types of people in different scenarios, it generally falls on the councillors. So, Chair, with your permission, I'd like, thank you very much for your report, but I'd also like to ask the Chair, I'll go one step further, if we can take this to the full council meeting, have a proper debate, and we can have a vote or a say on how we move this forward, because I, for one, feel that it's vitally important that we get it covered. And just on a personal note, I feel that as councillors, we need the enhanced. The basic just doesn't cover enough for me, personally. You know, I don't want someone going into my grandmother or something like that that I don't know hasn't been checked. You know, so, you know, just from a personal note, and professional as well, I feel that we need the enhanced check. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Downs. Just before I hand back to Craig, I think it's just also important to note the legal position that states with respect of councillors, and depending upon what element or effectively what hat it is that they are wearing when they might make those visits, because I just want to clarify, Councillor Downs used the phrase an agent of the council, and you would only be the agent of the council if you are acting on behalf of something like a committee, or it's councillors. We would only be agents of the council if we were acting on things like on behalf of the committee and quite limited circumstances. In our day-to-day dealings that most likely would happen as going to, I'll use the elderly example because it's probably the most relevant to most of us. If you were to attend an elderly individual's home because they've asked you for support and advice on a matter, you'd be acting in your capacity as a councillor, as an individual, as opposed to an agent of the council. And I just think it's important to put that there is a distinction between the two of those, acting in those two different capacities at that point. So just to clarify, I think, for all members as well, a little bit in that respect. We'll hear from Craig if he's got a response on that point first of all, before we look at the more broad point of moving forward, if that's okay with Councillor Downs. Craig.
Thank you, Chair. Just following on from what the Chair said about the first, the latter point about the adults, is that people that would go into homes and do them regulated activities functions would be checked. I wouldn't expect, and I guess this is for a debate for another time, but I wouldn't expect a councillor to be doing any of them functions for an adult, so it wouldn't pull them into regulated activity. And going back to the sort of the school setting, going into a school, it doesn't necessarily mean that you are going to be supervising that children. One thing that the regulations have at the moment is that you can have supervised members of staff that are not left alone with children, and they don't require a DBS check. It is contentious, I get that completely, but that is what's under the legislation. And finally, the point about the enhanced checks, I wouldn't see our councillor would be eligible for an enhanced check, unfortunately, unless they were bringing them into the regulated activity arena. And just finally, just on sort of a broader take, I completely get the concerns that you feel that as a councillor you should have a DBS check, and I guess that's a discussion, like you said, that if there was going to be a move towards councillors having a basic check, that's entirely up to council. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Apologies, I was just seeking some legal advice just at that stage as well. I think the issue is one of the things we could not, I don't believe, as an authority with our requirements under the Local Government Act, mandate all councillors to have them. Because that would then, as I understand it, would be putting a bar upon being a councillor in addition and over those legal barriers put on to you, i.e. you must at the time of the election fulfil the various criteria. That is the only criteria in law that there must be to be a councillor, and it is not for this. No council could impose additional legal restrictions on standing for election and carrying out that office if you were to be elected. There obviously is the point at the point of election where if there were certain criteria met with respect to convictions, for example, which is kind of the area I guess that the DBS check would be looking at, there are those requirements as set down in law on an individual's ability to stand in that basis. So there are certain elements of protections there anyway. In that respect, there are certain would be ruled out for certain under election law for certain convictions within a past 5-year period. Is it? Within, I think, from memory, it's a 5-year period. So if you were convicted of certain elements and your sentence was above a certain element, then you would be ineligible to stand for 5 years hence. So there are some protections in that respect, but I understand the principle will be, and I'm sympathetic to the arguments that Councillor Downs makes. It's a very difficult one, of wanting to ensure that, you know, from a personal point of view, as you say, yes, it would be, you know, we would want people to be covered or not, to be checked or not, but also for our own peace of minds that we can then say as councillors, well, we have been DBS checked, a two-way street, and I have sympathy to those arguments and those points. I'll make clear now. So I think the question would be how, if it were possible, to achieve what Councillor Downs is seeking to, which I think is effectively he would very much like himself to be DBS checked, I think is what I'm coming on that. I appreciate he'd like everyone, but I don't think we couldn't mandate it. We could not mandate it to all councillors, but certainly a position at least where he might be able to request that, you know, I would like to have one. So, Councillor Condacourt. Councillor Condacourt's hand was first. Councillor Condacourt.
Thank you, Chair. I think there's a clear point we're saying is it's not forcing a check, it's enabling the council to request a check. And quite a few of our wards are quite different. In my ward, I've got 2 lots of sheltered housing and quite a lot of independent living. In the next ward, there's none of that housing. So the roles of different councils will depend on the type of housing and the profile of your residents. And also, when I have visited people in independent living, in one case, I had the independent living officer with me because there was an issue with, I think it was a pull cords and other. So I think people do need to be wary if they aren't checked that they actually go and visit people with an arranged officer. So I don't think it's one size fits all, but I definitely think we should be enabling councillors who have a lot of need to contact residents in their own homes to be checked. But likewise, I think we also need to recognise that many councillors, because of the nature of their ward or whatever, would only be going into houses with the independent living officer or whatever they're calling them this week.
Councillor Tromans, I'll bring you in here. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I absolutely understand and agree with what Councillor Downs is talking about, the concerns he raises. Absolutely with that. And I think inadvertently this has brought up a really important point for us. There's a few things to consider here. First of all is whatever we may wish, whatever Councillor Downs has suggested and that I'd be very happy to vote for, we can't supersede the law of the land. And that's for Parliament to set what the criteria are, and we can't impose that will on people that want to be elected or have been elected. But hopefully, maybe the government will take another look at this, and or you know, Parliament will, and we'll see what comes out of that. But the really important thing that's come out of this has been touched on inadvertently by the officer, which was, well, if you're getting into a regulated activity, well, we shouldn't be. That's the point. But it's clear that particularly, you know, any councillor but newer members isn't exactly sure what can I and can't I do. What is the proper protocol for if I am meeting members of the public, or I am going to a school visit, or I'm doing things like this. I think that kind of briefing note to councillors to explain when you're in a school, they are responsible for making sure all visitors are supervised and all the rest of it. You shouldn't allow yourself to be put in a position that falls outside this criteria. If you're meeting residents in their home or in a public place, this is the protocol you should follow, this is what you should do. That guidance, I think, is clearly missing, and it would be great if what came out of this is that the council gave new, updated, very simple bullet point guidance on what is appropriate and what we should be straying into and what councillors shouldn't be. I think if councillors want to go and get a DBS check, anyone can. You know, I've got one done myself in the past, and some of us are in employments where you have to have it done at least once a year for a whole bunch of other things, for a different kind of regulation to the council stuff. So it's available to anyone to do that if they want, but I caution about us holding those up and saying, oh, it's all right. You know, anyone with a DBS check can be allowed to be alone with children or vulnerable adults or whatever. It's not a guarantee, and it could be exploited by an unscrupulous person who doesn't have a criminal record but wouldn't normally be allowed access to somebody vulnerable or groups or children or whatever in the normal course of things, either as a visitor to a school or a teacher or a counsellor or whatever, but because they're holding this magic piece of paper, all of a sudden people trust them. I don't think we want to get into those realms. So I think the two things that need to come out are, one, the briefing note that's really clear to all councillors on what they should and shouldn't be straying into and what the protocol for various types of meetings are. The second thing about the DBS checks is that people can go and get them themselves, but I don't think we want to give the message to the public out there that just because somebody presents a DBS check or what appears to be that should automatically give them or confer upon them certain rights. I think all these organisations need to follow their proper protocols, as do we as councillors, and that way, you know, everybody is safe, everybody is clear. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Tromans. Just to let you know, the point about a briefing on those elements of you know, regulated, not regulated, and to more generally to councillors what to do and not to do in situations has been picked up anyway. So that's been confirmed. Before I move on to the next speaker, Craig, just a clarification. Would there be anything that would stop a councillor, whether that's through themselves or through the council, having a basic DBS check? I know that obviously there are elements of enhanced, for example, because of the regulated activity, but would there be something that would stop a councillor as an individual having a basic check?
Not that I'm aware of, Chair. And just to follow up on the councillor's point, you're absolutely spot on in terms of a DBS check. It's only as good as the day it's done, and it's only if you've got caught. Thank you.
Thank you, Craig. Yes, I know that a number of the more salacious ones that come forward in the media, particularly high-profile individuals, would have at that point passed a DBS. So no system is perfect. That's certainly the case. Before I move on to the two speakers I've got on the list, having had a chance to sort of take advice and have a think and maybe hopefully help Councillor Downs to an extent with his request, this is perhaps something that we could ask the Employment Committee to look at, to reviewing the DBS policy, specifically in relation to, and we cannot dictate the terms of reference to obviously to another committee, but we could make a request to the Employment Committee that they look at DBS policy, specifically in relation to councillors, and the addition or inclusion or not, otherwise, of an ability for a councillor to request on themselves a basic DBS check. Is that perhaps the form of wording that Councillor Downs was looking for? Yes, I'm getting a thumbs up from the gallery. So I'm happy to actually take that with agreement of Councillor Beetham as a friendly amendment to the motion to note the report. Excellent. So we have now, the motion is now to note the report and the reference to the Employment Committee. Councillor Troman's suggestion of a briefing note is being carried out regardless, so we won't duplicate work in that respect. So appreciate that. May take the wind out of the sails of any of the next speakers, but they've requested so. Councillor Beetham, you're next on my list.
Brilliant, thank you, Chair. So my question is in regards to more of technicality points in regards to not being able to mandate it upon councillors. If it was to be put inside, let's say, the Code of Conduct, which is something all councillors sign up to, just through technicality points, I'm not suggesting it, would that be something which would be feasible?
With your permission, Councillor Beetham, I'm going to move on to Councillor Kenner and we'll come back. We'll just sort of ponder that for a moment, if that's okay with you, just to we want to make sure that anything we give is obviously correct before obviously stating that. Councillor Kenner.
Thank you, Chairman. It's just on the point of like the Employment Committee as well. But my understanding of DBS checks is the onus is on the employer or the individual to carry out the DBS check on the individual in question. Remember, we're, as councillors, not employees of the council. We're not brought here by the council. We're put in these seats by the people in our respective wards. So in what we do, we have no employer. That's my concern on that. And by putting it in the code of conduct, I'm worried about adding a potential bar to service. We shouldn't put any more restrictions than the law requires to us to serve as councillors. I mean, if I did a DBS check tomorrow, mine would come back clear. I'm just worried about putting restrictions in place that aren't necessarily mandatory. And also there's the point that was raised earlier by Councillor Tromans of just because someone's got a spotless DBS check doesn't necessarily mean that they're a squeaky clean individual. For example, the basic check, which is the only one we'll be eligible for, lists unspent convictions. So someone could have done something heinous 25 years ago, but their conviction is now spent and it will not show on a basic DBS check. So, like the officer said, it's only as good as the day that the DBS check was carried out, but it's also only as good as the day the crime is committed as well, if that makes sense from a expected point of view. So I just have concerns about, in effect, forcing councillors to do it. I think a wiser approach would be for councillors to take it up with their respective political parties before an election, or if they're independent as individuals. But regardless, each councillor can, if I'm right, go on the DBS Disclosure Barring website and carry out a DBS check if it would help their own peace of mind in dealing with their residents, if it's something they wish to have. And the £23 can be footed as well. And also in terms of who pays for a DBS check, if it's the employer and they would pay for a DBS check, again, we have no employer in what we do. So again, we can't mandate the council to pay for it. We can't mandate councillors to take it. So it's just on those finer details I have some slight concerns with the proposal. I mean, I completely understand the sentiment behind it. We need to keep residents safe as possible. I'm sure for all of us, or anyone with family in the borough, it would take a weight off their minds, but it's just the finer details of what's being proposed is what I have an issue with. Thank you, Chair.
Sorry, so just to clarify, we've had a bit of a discussion, and thank you, Councillor Kenner, for that. It's enabled us to have a bit of a think as to the best answer to Councillor Beetham. We're going to bring in, obviously, the monitoring officer at this stage. Philip.
Yes, thank you, Chair. A couple of things. I mean, obviously, you can write anything you like into the Code of Conduct. I think the issue is, in terms of whether or not it would make any sense to do so, insofar as what you'd be doing is you'd be saying we would like members to undertake a DBS. If a member refuses to have a DBS, they'd be in breach of the code. It'd end up in front of this committee. This committee has no effective sanctions, and therefore you'd be creating quite a lot of activity, a lot of smoke, but no heat. The other thing, and it's just a slightly wider issue, is obviously there's a question about human rights in this as well, in terms of you unless you are you can ground this in some form of legal principle as to why you would think it was justified. I think you'd probably face some members actually seeking to challenge the decision on the basis that actually it's an infringement of my human rights. There's no legal basis for you to do so, and therefore, in reality, if we were challenged, we'd probably fail in justifying that position. Admittedly, we'd have to go through quite a lengthy court process to get to that point, but I think it's highly likely that somebody, if they took quite a strong view on that, we would end up in that position.
Thank you, Philip. And I'd also perhaps add the additional, which you touched on the point that I made earlier on, which was if an individual were to fail that DBS, there would have to be some sort of policy upon that, but there is nothing the local authority could do if an individual councillor did fail a DBS, because they couldn't do anything that would stop them acting as a councillor. You know, that then, because that wouldn't bar them necessarily from standing. So it wouldn't even necessarily invalidate the original nomination of a councillor. As I look to our head of elections, is nodding away. So I think the debate tonight, if we sum it up, we understand that the desire to seek to protect both ourselves and to give some assurance to those that we may come into contact with. That the idea of the gold-plated, the enhanced, is just absolutely not possible. We don't fit the criteria as councillors, or we shouldn't fit the criteria as councillors for the definition of regulated activity for children or regulated activity for adults. I would strongly suggest any councillor here and any councillor at all that feels that for whatever reason they may come into the scope of regulated activity for children or regulated activity for adults speaks to both the monitoring officer and our equalities and safeguarding lead, because that will raise questions upon what elements are happening. And just to be clear, that idea of a regulated activity is different to the old idea of because you're going to somebody vulnerable or elderly. It is very clearly set out in our agenda on page 47 and 46 for children. So if individual member feels that they are carrying out something in that element in their capacity as a councillor, then I would strongly urge them to speak as soon as possible with the monitoring officer and our equalities and safeguarding officer individually about that. I don't believe there is from the discussion we've had this evening, but I think it's important just to make that clear to colleagues this evening. So, any further speakers? No? So it's been proposed and seconded, and the friendly amendment, as I've sort of pulled from Councillor Downs, has been proposed and amended, and that is that the report be noted and that a request goes to the Employment Committee on the specific angles of councillors and DBS policy. Is there any dissent to that? No, thank you very much. That is agenda item number 8. Agenda item number 9. So this comes on to the first of the audit reports that this committee requested earlier on at its extraordinary session. Can I put on record at the moment our thanks to the audit team that with absences are doing an absolutely great job at the moment, and just generally the way in which a number of these reports have been presented to us, the next 3 items, is incredibly clear. I know I've spoken to a great number of colleagues in advance who've made those points as well. So can I put on record this committee's thanks for those, particularly as we are receiving the full reports, given that they are requests of the committee, as opposed to normally we get more summaries as they are in the standard work programme. So just to put our record on thanks to that, because I know that there have been some amendments to try and make it as easy as possible for members to read and understand. So our thanks for that. So at that stage, bring in our internal auditor, Sophie.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening to everyone. The scheme of delegation is and arrangements detailed within the Council Constitution, and the coverage that we looked at is relating to the officer scheme delegation, which is a sub-delegation coming down from the main scheme. You have the full report, which details our audit scope and the findings, the summary of our opinion, and also the action plan that contained within that report. There were 4 recommendations, 2 of which were priority 2s and 2 were priority 3s. The main issues that we have identified as part of this audit was the some delays in updating the Constitution to reflect the working arrangement and structure within the Council, and also the updating of the sub-delegation, the sub-delegation of the scheme of delegation, if you like, by officers, and the holding of those schemes by the monitoring officer, which the scheme required to be maintained and make available for public reviewing at all times. The coverage of the audit was a 12-month period between July 20 and August 21, and of which a total of 20 officer delegated authority decisions were made or recorded. The table outlined within the report on page 4 details the range of decisions that were taken, and page 5, which showed that a total of about approximately 36% of the decisions made under the delegated authority related to the issues of the lawful, the lawful. Sorry, I've just lost my thread there. Yes, sorry. So the lawful, proposed lawful development, of which were individual items added to the circulation list, of which the Director of Planning and Regulation have delegated authority in this area, except when those are called in. What we can say now is that following this audit, during the process of the audit, the Constitution was updated, and the main scheme was also updated to reflect the previous structure. That's excluding the new structure that came into effect from the 1st of October. So that still needs to be reflected. Following our recommendation, a central folder has now been created to hold the sub-delegation schemes. The updated schemes were up until prior to the October restructure, has been provided to the monitoring officer, and we have received those. However, following the new structure, these will now need to be updated as soon as possible to reflect that. Due to the out-of-date Constitution at the time and the lack of up-to-date scheme of delegations, there were a couple instances out of the 70, which is a minor number of cases, where the authority reference number wasn't correctly used because the officer had moved service area or directorate, and because they didn't have the regular, the up-to-date scheme, they reverted back to using their own original scheme of delegation, which no longer existed. And also, as part of that, we noticed that during the COVID period, there were a number of decisions that were taken under emergency decisions. The schemes required certain decision to be reported to either Cabinet or Council, depending on the nature of those decisions. Majority of them were done, apart from 3 or 4 where we couldn't find any the evidence that they did go. However, on some of those cases, reports were taken at some point to committee or to scrutiny and so on those actually decision or scheme that were moving forward. On all of the 70 cases, decision forms were completed by officers and were provided to the committee services team. However, there were several cases where we noticed that there were gaps in the publication of those decision forms. So it's not because they weren't completed, but they were sort of like they might have not been pulled in from the email that was sent to them, and there were slight gaps in the publication. So we have made recommendation that the index is actually monitored, and if there's any gaps, the committee services team need to follow up on that as soon as possible, so that there was no delay in the publication of the decision forms for transparency. like I said, all the summary, so it's been summarised, the decision and the findings and the recommendation, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Sophie. That's very comprehensive. A point I should have just said just at the start, just to remind everybody on these audit items that Sophie and her team and colleagues obviously do the audit. They are not responsible for the actual day-to-day processes in those departments in which they audit. If colleagues' lines of questioning are going down that technical route, obviously I will pull back on that element. But it may be that if there are a lot of questions that are more specific to the directorate, that in future we may want to call relevant officers from those directorates to come and answer those more specific questions. And as chair, I'm very happy to facilitate and ensure that happens if that is the will of the committee. So just a sort of reminder, as always in these audit things, it's the audit team are the ones going in and checking the compliance. They're not responsible for the day-to-day areas. In this, for instance, for example, the schema delegation, which would usually fall to the monitoring officer to my left, but so further on some of the reports, those officers may not necessarily be in the room. So just a reminder to colleagues on that respect. So in order to move debate, propose that the reports be noted. Thank you. Seconder from Councillor Beetham. Any member wishing to speak? I've got Councillor Tromans indicating.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of quick observations. I'm looking obviously at the audit action plan, the audit, I guess out of your audit action tracker. Line 1 just doesn't have the relevant boxes filled in. I appreciate the comment in there that, these were defective and missing at the time of the audit and they've subsequently been fixed. That's good. We needed to know that, but we still need to know what the priority was, who the person responsible was, the date it was, those actions were fixed. Likewise, there's references to care to be taken as being the action plan. I wish I could get away with my management response to audits by saying, yes, we'll be careful, we'll tell people to be careful. Actually, we need more than just care. It needs to be training will be provided, or this additional check or control will be put in place, like 2 people will have to look at it. So whatever goes in there in the future, it does need to be. I know we want people to be careful and the training and whatever implies that, but it needs to be more than just care. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Tromans. Councillor Con, do you think you want to come back, Sophie? You're happy? Yeah, Sophie.
The reason why they weren't filled in, because those actions have been completed already. Yes. So because these during the course of the audit, the Constitution was updated before we completed it. So it was not an outstanding issue for us at the time. In terms of the care and attention, it was the fact that the scheme has been updated and it's following because the schemes weren't available at the time for officers to use the reference number, and because now that has been addressed also, hence that's why it was left just to care and attention, because of the need to actually making sure the other recommendation that did say we need to actually timely update our constitution and also the scheme delegations. Thank you.
Councillor Tromans, do you want to just briefly come back?
Yeah, just to come back, but you're accepting the point that in future you will, even though the point's already been done by the time you publish this, you will put when it was done and who the responsible person was and all the rest of it, not just leave them blank, because it does need completing each time. Otherwise we don't have the full, well, yeah, it says it's been done, but when and by who, we still need to put that in. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Tromans. Councillor Condacor.
Thank you, Chair. The point about property purchases, quite often when we did this with Gresham Road, you buy a property but then you need to spend hundreds of thousands of pounds on it. I'm a bit concerned that property purchases are being done under delegated powers without always consulting members, and it's a bit of a vague area, because you may agree to buy, it's like the bed and breakfast, you might agree to buy the bed and breakfast conversion into homeless for 700,000, but then you're effectively committing the council then to 700,000 pounds work on it, and I think they should be put by politicians, the portfolio holders or the finance holder, not just it being delegated decision. So it's visibility, because we only see the delegated decisions when they've happened. Yeah, there's a nice little bit of paper comes out on, or PDF nowadays saying the delegated decision has been taken to do X, Y or Z, by which time it's done. So I do have concerns, particularly because of the mistakes the council has made in the past over underestimating how much a decision to purchase something then leads into decisions on having to spend money. Thank you.
Oh yeah, I just, the only point I would note, obviously, is that is not a question about whether the scheme is being followed or not, but it's actually the scope of the scheme in the first place, which is not what this report tonight looks at. I did have indications from Stephen 151 so I wanted to have a come back.
Yes, thank you. I mean, it's a good point, well made. I think what I would say, and not referring to any specific property purchase or transaction here in Nuneaton and Bedworth, but looking more generally, experience I've had is sometimes when you have to deal with property transactions, you actually have to move very quickly. And while people ideally these should go to members, sometimes inform in terms of a formal delegated authority to enable an action to happen, and again to be made for the local authority, it has to be done on a delegated authority basis. So this is not uncommon in local authorities generally.
Thank you for that, and just also noting that as our interim 151, obviously Stephen's got a range of experience across a great number of authorities in the role, in his sort of consulting, so thank you for that as well. Councillor Beetham.
Brilliant, thank you. So this is a question in regards to the audit findings, which I'm guessing that Philip Richardson will be able to help me just understand a query here, but of course someone else is better suited. Because the Constitution took so long to update, have there been any kind of lessons learned for the process? Because it said it was last updated in June 2019 and then changes occurred since then. So I was wondering, has there been any action on basically version control of Constitution since, so that the public can access it up to date?
Thank you, Chair. I guess the first thing to say is that the Constitution is never up to date, because a little bit like the discussion about DBS checks, no sooner have you published it than it's going to be out of date. We've had, I think, from memory, something like 5 restructures in the space of a period of about 18 months. So it is always going to be a process of attrition, effectively trying to keep pace. What I would say is that normally traditionally we have updated the Constitution usually once a year. We do try and time it for annual council so that an up-to-date version is available for elected members. Clearly the main thing we try and do is ensure that at least the electronic version is up to date, if not the published version that we print and give to members in hard copy format. Looking ahead, assuming that we have a period of relative calm in terms of structures, then we will catch up. But it's by no means clear, because obviously local government has been extremely fluid and will, I think, continue to be so for quite some considerable period of time. So there will always be a little bit of a lag between the Constitution in terms, and I should say that by talking about the Constitution being up to date, we are talking primarily around the schemes of delegation, because that's the most fluid element to it in terms of the content. Obviously, unusually, as a result of a change in control, we've had new committees, a new structure for cabinet, a new structure for overview and scrutiny panels as well. So it's been necessary to sort of try and capture all of those and move those forward, which are now in the Constitution. But clearly, as of October, we've now got a new scheme delegation that is doing the rounds at the moment with directors for them to update and confirm that they're happy that it captures their new span of responsibilities. But of course, there's always going to be a little bit of lag in terms of getting that finalised and signed off. And ultimately, within the Constitution, it does give a delegated authority to the head of paid service to sign that off, because we need that ability to be able to then put that in place relatively quickly. I guess the only good news, if I can be glib about it, is that in terms of spans of responsibility, at the last restructure, nothing changed for my directorate, so my scheme of delegation is still up to date, I'm pleased to say.
Thank you very much. If there are no further questions on that at this stage, no. So proposed and seconded that we note the report. Is there a dissent? No, thank you very much. On to agenda item number 10, which is the internal audit report on compensation. Again, another request of this committee when it was first established following change of membership and annual council. And again, one I think Sophie's presenting again for us. Please take it away.
Thank you, Chair. The request on this particular project is mainly to identify the number of compensation claims or compromising agreements that were made by the council in the last 10 years, and the total number of the total payment made. So the compensation payments and the terms of those and the compromise settlement agreement are highlighted in the report on page 3 and 5. And the details of the transactions, there were 20 budget codes were reviewed that had a compensation or a compromise text within that. And these were highlighted, summarised in a table on page 3 and 4. Due to the confidentiality nature of the agreements or the payments, we're not able to provide any individual details on any particular cases. However, HR has confirmed that all the agreements are indeed classified, and they were able to disclose a number of cases and the total paid annually in the past 10 years. And these are outlined in the table contained on page 5 of the report. Within page 5, there are a total of 25 cases, and of a total of £277,000 approximately, which averaging about £10,800 per case on that one, where it's fallen into the category of compromise and confidentiality payment. Thank you. I'm happy to take any queries, any questions.
Thank you very much. If I could just ask you to turn your mic off. Thank you. Thank you very much. So in order to facilitate debate, I will move that we note the report. Thank you. Seconder from Councillor Beetham. Any member wishing to speak or comment at this stage? Councillor Conical.
Thank you, Chair. It would be useful to know what happened to a few things in the past. One was the dispute over the riding centre at Galley Common. I don't know if that counts as a list of compensations, but I believe there was some form of settlement that had a non-disclosure agreement on it, so it might be worth just checking if that is recorded in the list. And also, quite often when we terminate employment or there's some disagreement, there's a gagging order imposed, which I think is quite often against the public interest. So maybe it would be useful to know if that is still a practice. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Councillor Beetham.
Hi, so it's just a quick question, and it has here as one of the reasons for use of account code twice is, and I just wonder if there's more explanation as to what it is in regards to home loss. If someone would be able to supply me an answer either today or written response at some point.
Could you perhaps just highlight to us, Councillor Beetham, a bit more exactly where you are on the table, just for ease of everyone in the room?
Yep, so it is on bottom of page 3 of the report, which is 65 of the agenda, and it is also 5th down on the 4th page, which is page 60. 66. So bottom of page 3 on the report, and then the full fifth one down on page 4. Thank you.
So just for clarification, we've got transaction narrative, so it's under the table in 3.12. We're looking at account code 3098, purchase of properties, which is home loss bracket Camp Hill. And what you're suggesting is you've also got account code 3458, home loss, and again it's home loss payments, and again it's home loss bracket Camp Hill. Did you have anything of that at the moment on that, Sophie, or is it something that's best to come back, Sophie, at this stage?
Thank you. Craig may be able to provide some more details on account code, but I understand that within the purchase properties, when we were doing the regeneration of Camp Hill, there was some disturbance payment, and some the account codes used to identify different type of payment made for disturbance or home loss in terms of different movement of resettlement of people. So it's whether it can be drilled down. That's what to identify all the different type of transactions, isn't it? So, but Craig will be able to provide the answer better on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Sophie. Craig.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. What I can clarify is the way that we actually undertook this exercise, I did some work with internal audit on this, was to do it twofold. First of all, look at the account codes. So the left-hand side, left table, left column. Which account codes did we need to drill down into? So we could look at all transactions within that, but also do a full search of the financial ledger to see if there was anything in the text narrative at transaction level, so we could identify if it was in a different account code. Which is why we're seeing some of these transactions, like for example this one, appearing in two different areas because the officer who was actually coding up that particular payment chose to put it against property purchases at that particular time, and we'd identify it from the transaction analysis. So that's why it's appearing twice.
Thank you very much. Any other member? Councillor Tromans.
Thank you, Chair. I'm looking at account code 0700 and point 3.1.4 in the report on page 5 of 5. And then we've got a table under 3.1.5 which seems to show something different that adds up to being 200,000, as the officer said. I'd like to try and understand the difference between what's in that table under 3.1.5 and what's in the code 0700, which is £188,000. It seems that these aren't, compensatory awards as such. They're things like gratuity and holiday pay. How would holiday pay be separated out? And surely the council's holiday pay over 10 years has been an awful lot more than £188,000. In fact, probably it's more than that in a year. So we need some more detail around account code 0700, I think, to explain what that 188 is. And that doesn't have to be now. I think a follow-up email to members of the committee would be fine.
Thank you, Councillor Tromans. I've got Stephen wanting to.
Yeah, Councillor, we'll take delivery of that. I mean, as I'm sure you'll appreciate, it's a little difficult to give you that sort of analysis here off the cuff, but as it were. But if we can take it away and do a note to you and share it with others, we can give you that kind of reconciliation. I'll also, Chair, shall I mention something regarding the confidentiality clauses that Councillor, can I pick that up now with your leave? I think I'm inclined to think here is like most other authorities in the sense that sometimes confidentiality clauses are considered appropriate for various personal reasons. But again, what I'd suggest is we take this one away and we perhaps get, on the back of this report, get a note from our HR colleagues to say what the policy is to applying them when they've been applied in this journey, and so as to inform you as to what the approach on confidentiality is here. Would that be helpful?
Yes, that would be incredibly helpful. Thank you very much. And if I can request, given that that is looking more at specific application and a policy and application of a policy, if when we get that element report of the circumstances that would, or the criteria in order to have a confidentiality agreement reached, if we could perhaps copy that to the employment committee as well, given that obviously they would be the responsible body for the actual policy itself. If there needed to be amendments or not, that'd obviously be for them, not necessarily for us. So just as a courtesy, as it kind of strays slightly in towards their area as well, that'd be great. Thank you. If there are no further questions at this stage, then, which there are not, it's been proposed and seconded that the report be noted. Is there any dissent to that? No, in which case it stands that agenda item 10 be noted. On to the next item on our agenda, agenda item 11, which is the final of the 3 reports coming to us tonight that this committee commissioned, and that is another report from Sophie, up again, on the community funding, community group funding in the last 10 years, 2021 to 2022. So, Sophie, over to you again. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. The work on the community groups fundings in the last 10 years, the data is actually pulled from the statement of the accounts to identify how much the number of fund and how much the total fund that they will make during the period of time. And this, for the last 10 years table, is actually contained on page 18 of that report. And because the requests were concentrating on the funding made to local community group, we only identified 5 such community groups that fall under that request criteria. And these are Borkington Village Centre, Stockingford Community Centre, Local Ethnic Minority Advisory Council, the Nuneaton Harrier Community Association Limited, and the Warwickshire Community and Voluntary Action Group. All the findings are highlighted within the report, and the overall audit opinion of this is actually limited assurance. The variety of reasons why we have actually given that opinion, because all the officers stated that information that there were processes in place to do the check and balance of the funding before, after they've been awarded. However, because of the information were given in paper format and due to COVID, those folders were unable to be located, and they weren't able to provide us with the evidence that the checks were actually carried out and the data were obtained. We were unable to place assurance on the information that the officers were provided to us. And then the last couple of years, because of COVID, some of the community centres were not used according to the purpose of the funding, because they double up as an emergency centre to provide, it's a community-based service, however, not under the remit that the funding was made. So, therefore, there's a question of whether the terms and conditions of the service level agreement have been met. but understandably at the time we were told that a decision was reached just to continue to make the funding and to enable the community centres to be able to function and provide services to the community at a time of great needs. So there were 8 recommendations within that report. 5 are priority 2s and 3 are priority 3s. And the process has been tightened up in place now, and we will revisit this in 6 to 12 months' time to ensure that the SLAs has been put in place and the information has been obtained and checked according to the terms and conditions of use of the funding use. So I'm quite happy to take any question on this. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So once again, to enable debate, move that the report be noted. Is that seconded? Councillor Beetham again, thank you very much. Any member at this stage? Councillor Condacor.
Thank you very much, Chair. First, I just, having read the report, need to declare that I do occasionally use the running track at Pingles, so I don't think that's a prejudicial interest, but it's just worth noting, as does my wife. In terms of these service level agreements, is the same thing also applying to places we give, like football pitches, free of charge to the various clubs that have taken those on? Because although there's not a monetary change, it's the same issue of giving, like Sandon Park or whatever, to the clubs that are using that. And they will manage it, look after it, do all sorts of things for us. And effectively the monetary bit might be 0, but there is an asset being given to this community group in exchange for various levels of service. So I think that might need to be just checked. And also, quite often, it's actually a record to that. I think the audit is right. We haven't got a very good audit trail sometimes of when these agreements are done, Chair. So maybe if I could ask the auditors, when they do the follow-up review, just to check some of the 0 financial, but in-kind sort of transactions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Sophie or Stephen, any at this stage want to come back on there?
In terms of the non-financial transactions on free use of the football team, the 2 community centres have football facilities, but Stockingford Community Centre obviously is run by the management committee. We are not involved with taking the income from that. So the decision as to whether they provide the football pitches for free, we probably wouldn't get to know that, and it would be probably entirely their decision to make. But we can actually look into what other free use facility that has been given. But from what I can see on there with Stockingford, we have got very little scope to look at that because it is run by the management committee for that, and it's just quite difficult to actually obtain any financial transaction from them. But I have requested, because I'm doing community centres audit at the moment, I have requested further information, so, and if I have any more, I can actually provide further details on that. But it will come back into a community centre audit, which you will be provided with the details later at Linda's 6 months report and so on. But yes, we certainly can check that to see what else we can find. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think it's important to note the scope of the audit that were actually set by the committee in the first place, and some of those standalone play pitches, given that they are not community group funding. I take the point about service level agreements and nil value, but because they are not actually funding groups that we are funding, would not therefore have been covered in the scope of this report and the audit anyway. It may be that Councillor Condacor wants to move that to the OSP that would be covered, that would cover central services, which would be that covers Councillor Evans' portfolio, because obviously play pitches and things, the strategy of that would come under him in the leisure element. So it might be the relevant OSP might want to look at those kind of things more generally as a present and ongoing policy, rather than obviously the auditing that we're looking to do here. So just a suggestion that might help there. Councillor Beetham.
Brilliant, thank you, Chair. So, having looked through the report, I was a bit concerned that we were unable to find the data that had been given to us in paper format. I was wondering, in your looking at the audit, where did that audit trail end into? Did we receive it and then from there was no information, or is there a process of scanning the paper copies and putting onto an online system so that there is always that backup just in case? Thank you.
Yeah, Sophie.
Thank you. The community group, I understand it, provided a Live Archivile folder of all different types of stuff, and it's in this building. But because of the team has actually been working remotely, and also they have some high priority project. What we have to appreciate is that the current team is actually new to looking after this responsibility, because previously it fell under a different team which have now been disbanded, if you like. The service level agreement up until 2 years ago were completed, and it's only during COVID period that hadn't been completed due to the change of not understanding what scope they should be given under that. The paperwork, they said that they have received it and within this building, but they were unable to locate the Live Archivile. They have moved offices as well during the COVID period, and the time for them to locate those information during the audit period would have taken a long time. We wouldn't have been able to bring the report back at this for November's meeting, but they admitted that the file's massive, but we did ask that the key reports, such as financial reports, should be scanned as soon as people get back to the office. Certain things probably in the post, or just folders being left on the desk. They need to scan those in, and then it's to assist the future agile working, because at the moment there's more need now to actually work remotely, and we do need those information, and the team understand that.
Yeah, thank you very much, Sophie. And I think there are two elements of that. One is kind of a delay to things being scanned in because of COVID, and the fact that obviously things were collated centrally at the town hall, and then the team members may not have been there for the physical scanning in, and that's one thing I think that's understandable. I think the question mark and the issues that really raised are those that issues and documents that are outstanding from applications that are well pre-COVID. I think is the element that certainly gives me, and I think a number of colleagues indicating and nodding, is that's the element of concern. There's where the COVID excuse, for want of a better term, isn't there, where these processes have still failed at that stage. So I think it's very important, and it's very with foresight of the committee to actually have commissioned this, given that we have got an overall opinion of limited assurance, especially in elements that relate to finances, ultimately, and that is an area that I think we also particularly certainly need to be aware of. Councillor Kenner indicated.
Thank you, Chairman. Just to turn to the sort of very end of this report, page, I think that's 18 of this report. It's sort of the breakdown of all the funding for the community groups over the last 10 years. Just want to draw everyone's attention to the Warwickshire Race Equality Partnership. Now I can see on there the payments that have gone out over the last decade. Now, the Race Equality Partnership ceased in 2017. They changed, they became the Equality and Inclusion Partnership. So I just want to make sure that over £20,000 that we've spent since that organisation has changed has been going to the correct organisation, the new Equip, rather than the old Warwickshire Race Equality Partnership. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. I suspect it's going to be, just to give officers some time to think, I suspect it's going to be one where they'll have to come back and check, but just to give them a few moments to think, Yeah, I'll just pass over to Stephen Fitzgerald.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, Chair. I think this now falls in Tom Shardlow's area of operation under the new structure. So we'll take that away and get the verification that you're looking for, Councillor.
Yeah, thank you very much. And if we could approach Kelly, if we could approach Tom Shardlow in that vein, and if we could circulate that response to all members of the committee, please, when we've got that, just to be assured. Hopefully, it's as I say, this comes back to the area we raised at the start. Obviously, that the audit team do the snapshot working, but they're not responsible for the day-to-day management of those departments. So they're a classic case to actually prove the example, the point I was making earlier. So thank you on that. If there are no further members wishing to speak at this time, it's been noted and proposed and seconded that we note the report and obviously the clarification to come to us to follow. Is there any dissent? No, that's therefore the report be noted. And again, thank you very much to Sophie. I think her first presentation to us tonight, and thank you very much. It's been very helpful, very forthright, and very clear. So thank you very much for that. On to agenda item number 12. This is the appointment of the Electoral Registration Officer, the ERO, the Deputy ERO, and the scale of fees for election staff. So that one I look to Martin Harris, our Head of Elections. Martin.
Thank you, Chair. This is a report of two halves, members. The first part sets out the appointment of our new Chief Executive as Electoral Registration Officer, something which probably should have been done during the report that appointed him Head of Service, but that's a tidying up matter. Appoints me as Head of Elections as the Deputy Electoral Registration Officer and Deputy Returning Officer for day-to-day operational management purposes of electoral registration and the elections function, so for kind of resilience reasons. And then the second half of the report sets out the scale of fees which we'd use for staff appointed at election time. That's something which a number of authorities will do on a periodic basis. It hasn't been done at Nuneaton and Bedworth for some time. So with a new returning officer in post, and for transparency reasons, we're bringing these fees for you to look at. It's worth saying that the fees Appendix A have been benchmarked against other Warwickshire authorities, and in fact they're very similar to those that the County Council used and have paid, or will pay us eventually, for the May elections. And a very, very similar report has just been approved by North Warwickshire Borough Council's Resources Committee. Basically give you that assurance that the fees in this report are benchmarked against our near neighbours and represent good value for money in terms of working returning officers, presiding officers and other staff at election time. Appendix B, there is a small comparison again against 2016 and 2018 fees as well. So you can see there is a small increase, obviously to do with cost of living, and also to make sure that we ensure that, especially for staff working 15-hour days, that we still are able to pay them a living wage, even though they get a fixed fee. So I'm happy to take any questions. Hopefully it's relatively straightforward to members.
Thank you very much. It's just, I'm going to move the recommendations, but they're just to format them slightly differently. In our agenda point, we've got 3 recommendations. Just to clarify, we can't approve the proposed scale of fees ourselves, and that we ourselves can't give the delegated authority. All of that should be a recommendation to council. So effectively, it should be 1A, B. On the agenda item, 2 would turn into C, and 3 would turn into D, if that makes sense. So recommendation, so I will move that the committee recommend to council, A, the chief executive appointed as the electoral registration officer, B, the head of elections is appointed as deputy electoral registrations officer and deputy returning officer, C, the proposed scale of fees attached to Appendix A is approved, and D, the chief executive given delegated authority to make minor amendments to the attached fees in Appendix A to reflect the National Joint Council Local Government Pay Award when it reports. Is there a seconder? Councillor Tromans is seconded. Thank you very much. Any member wishing to speak on this item? No? Excellent. So it's been proposed and seconded that the recommendations be put to full council, which will come. Is there any dissent? No, in which case that's carried. Thank you very much. We turn now to agenda item number 13, the review of the performance management framework and risk management policy and strategy, to be presented by the Director of Finance, Stephen Fitzgerald. Stephen.
Thank you. Yes, we are bound to periodically review the performance management and the risk management framework. This is on a cycle of every 2 years. Also, of course, we've had a change of political control in May, and consistent with that, we feel it's the right time to report our approach to this committee and get your approval. So what we're asking for tonight is your approval for this report, just to bring out some key elements which I think are relevant. If we look at the two aspects, first performance and secondly risk, I think particularly we're identifying in our performance approach quality of service, integrity, accountability from officers, full cooperation with councillors, objectivity, efficiency, and confidence to be innovative and try things out. And I think one of the really important things, and this is something that's perhaps championed by the National Audit Office, is we're adopting a data-driven approach, using data that's accurate, valid, reliable, relevant, and complete as we are advising members on decision making. In terms of the responsibilities this gives for the officer performance management, it identifies the responsibilities of the management team, other managers and employees generally. And much of this work is captured in the performance report, which ultimately goes to Cabinet, but also I can assure members here is very thoroughly scrutinised at management team level to pick up aspects of performance. It is comprehensive and I think is a good piece of work. Moving on to risk, obviously the effective management of risk for local authorities is key to their achieving outcomes and positive outcomes for the communities. We have seen in recent years in other local authorities where the management of risk has broken down, sometimes in fairly tragic circumstances. So what this report does is refreshes that approach, starting off with the identification of risk and using the political, economic, societal and technical framework, which is fairly standard in both of the public and the private sector. Then focusing on an analysis using the red, amber and green ratings, which is consistent with approaches that are used in the majority of local authorities. What efforts we make to control that risk, and systems for monitoring and review. And again, I can assure members that the full risk register and the risk ratings are considered on a regular basis by the council's management team. So in a sense, what this report does is renews and refreshes both processes, and I commend it to you.
Thank you very much. To move debate, I move the recommendation that the revised performance management framework and risk management policy strategy documents are approved. Is there a seconder? Councillor Kenner, thank you. Any member wish to speak at this stage? Councillor Tromans.
Thank you, Chair. The performance side of it is obviously very important. That gets, as we've heard, heavily scrutinised. I don't think we're here to try and usurp the cabinet or full council's authority there. So I'll just confine this to the risk side of things. I understand it might be appropriate to revisit the framework and the approach towards risk management only every couple of years, but I was quite alarmed when I wasn't hearing anything more until the very end, when the officer very kindly confirmed that, but we do look at the risk register more often. Yeah, I'd like some assurance about exactly how often, and it would be really nice to have a full copy of the risk register be included with this, showing what the most recent updates to that risk register were, just so that we can see it is a living, breathing, evolving document, it's a work in process, and that it is being kept up to date. So yeah, some assurance around how often it's looked at, and a copy sent round to us later would be very helpful. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Tromans. Stephen, bring you back.
Yes, the management team reviews the risks and the register thoroughly on a quarterly basis. We can do a note to you on the changes, and I think I recall this being done fairly recently, I think in the last 2 weeks at management team. So we can do a short note on the changes and share the register as it exists at the moment.
Thank you very much, and thank you for that assurance. That's very helpful. Councillor Condacor.
Thank you, Chair. I'm always frustrated by the risk register being so unreadable. It's a umpteen feet high document in a PDF, and there's one column that's got millions of acronyms and this meeting and this. And so I think the format of it, if it was a spreadsheet, that actually we could change the width for the columns when you send to councillors, we could actually get it so it was a lot more readable effectively. Because it does become if one column's full of stuff, you can take a page over one risk just for all the committees. And one thing I've asked at scrutiny committees, particularly I'm quite concerned about the fire risks at the moment, is about there's a fire risk panel or something. And I've asked at scrutiny panels, when does that meet? And I've never had an answer back from my questions. So I think some of these mitigations could be quite good mitigations, but if we don't actually have the ability to know what this FRM or FRA is and how often they meet, and it may be only meet annually, it might meet once a month. It does make a big difference. The other issue is quite often when you ask things like the new hotel, they say, well, that has a separate risk register. So it's how the project risk registers are actually linked to the corporate risk register to make sure we timely see things going well or things staying green. So I think those couple of things would be useful for us when we get a risk register scrutiny, that it is easy to read, up to date, and we actually have an idea about some of these mitigations to make sure they're actually effective and timely. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Director of Finance, Stephen.
Yes, thank you, Councillor. I mean, I think there's kind of a balance to be achieved. The approach we adopt here is a fairly comprehensive risk register, which by its very nature tends to be quite long. But I think what we've been keen to do is make sure that we're capturing all the relevant risks that an organisation of this size should be doing. But I do hear your pain about the acronyms, and I think we can use the proper protocol with acronyms. If that's not done, we will do that and make sure that they're spelled out in full, at least at the start of the document. So we'll do a bit of a sanitisation on that, and I hear that. I mean, looking specifically at the fire risk item you refer to, perhaps Phil can help me with the fire risk committee, but what I would say generally, I know about the particular area of concern, actually major risks like the risk in this case of of potential fire in this building and associated health and safety, that automatically escalates to the management team, so has been discussed in some detail. So sometimes with other committees and councils it takes time to convene them, but because the management team meets on a weekly basis, we immediately deal with anything that's a fundamental risk like the fire risk or anything associated with COVID or any of those issues.
Councillor Condacor.
Thank you, I think I was using fire risk as an example. It's sort of useful to know how often things meet, if they're mitigation, just to make sure they're meets regularly or meets monthly or meets quarterly. Just to say that the mitigation column is quite often impossible to know without asking questions. So I think a bit more confidence that it was effective. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, just bring in Philip Richardson here.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So just to answer Councillor Conductor's very specific question, the Fire Management Group meets every other month. And within the risk register, one of the sources of assurance is the minutes and the records of those meetings, which, as Stephen says, where issues are highlighted for escalation, they are escalated through to management team. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. That's most helpful. Any other speakers? No, excellent. In which case, it's been proposed that the recommendation that the documents be approved. Is there any dissent? No, they stand approved. Thank you very much. Agenda item number 14, and just on that, our thanks to Stephen, our interim Director of Finance and Section 151 officer, for coming to us tonight, travelling to us. Hopefully he makes his last train home. And thank you very much for your assistance in advance of the committee as well. Agenda item number 14, review of the Register of Members' Interests, Gifts and Hospitality Register. Director of Planning and Regulation, Phil Richardson.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, Chair, this is a standard report we bring every year to Audit and Standards Committee. It is a recommendation from the Committee on Standards in Public Life. It's about openness and transparency. The report itself is fairly short, and the only thing I really wanted to highlight is Appendix A, which is on page 121, and really just to flag that normally I would normally expect to see a much larger table of entries in Appendix A than we have here. I suspect, however, that what we are witnessing is the impact of the pandemic. As you know, there hasn't been much interaction either between services and the public on a face-to-face basis. It has tended to be much more done on a remote basis. Therefore, the opportunities for members of the public to thank officers in particular and perhaps provide them with something has not occurred, certainly not in the last 18 months or so. Notwithstanding that, we will normally, upon your recommendation, send out to all members and staff the annual reminder to register any gifts and hospitality. We usually do that in the run-up to Christmas because that's usually a time when you would expect there to be some opportunity for a gesture of thanks from members of the public to particularly staff who are dealing with them. So we do that as a matter of course, and I would suggest we do that this year as well, Chair, especially as I think we are getting, things are starting, I'll touch wood when I say this, but things are starting to relax a little bit more in terms of service delivery in particular. The only other thing to stress, Chair, is on the table in front of the dais is a grey lever arch file. That contains all of your declarations of pecuniary interest as submitted, which are published on the Council's website, but they are there for you as a committee, if you do want to have a little review of them, you're perfectly entitled to do so. If you do and you highlight or spot anything which is untoward, either in connection with your own or any other members' declarations, then please do flag that, because we will raise that with any particular member if need be, in case they need to make a correction or an addition, etc., etc. So it's purely for review. It's a transparency issue, Chair. The recommendations are set out in at 2.1 and 2.2. So it's really for you as a committee now, Chair, to decide what you want to do next.
Thank you very much for that report. In order to allow debate, I'll move the recommendations at 2.1 and 2.2. Is that seconded? Councillor Rudkin will go for a change. They're just in my line of sight here, that's all. So that has been proposed and seconded. Any member wish to speak? Councillor Condacor.
Just a quick point on members' declarations of interest. The website is quite messy, and at one point it had two versions, the pre-May 2021 version and the post-May 2021 version, both there depending on how you search the website. So I think it would be good to sanitise it and make sure we haven't got more than 34 versions on there, because some, I don't know if the officers type a name differently or space, yeah, but you seem to be able to have more than one version of a councillor's declaration on there, which shouldn't happen. You know, if you have a new one, the old one should disappear. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Phil.
Yes, Chair, I think that's right. We should only have the current record on the web. So Kelly's here, so she'll take that away and we'll follow that up. And if there are any old versions, they will be removed from the website, Chair.
Thank you very much. I think all of us have a duty in this as well. You know, that the interests that are out there are our interests, as it were, as individual councillors and as councillors as a body. So I think if anybody does spot those sorts of instances, if they can provide a link to Kelly, and I'm sure that'll therefore be able to be cleared up. So if there are individual instances like that or anything else, please just make Kelly and the team at Member Services aware, so that we can make sure it's correct. But I would note it's always better to over-publish than under-publish, so at least there were 2, not 0, would be my way of looking at that. So, any further member wish to speak at this stage? Oh, sorry, yes, I have it on my list. Apologies, Councillor Tromans.
Thank you, Chair. It's only very briefly. If I just ask Director Richardson again, is it £25 is the limit? Anything over that has to be declared, or is it £20 or?
Just fill it back in there.
Yes, Chair, it's 20 in the code, £20.
Great. In that case, it looks like everything under the, and this, I think, speaks to the fact that, you know, the point you were making earlier, there's been so little, it appears that they're all under £20. It says there's no amount specified for the cake that was donated to the appeal. I think I did say 18 to £20, depending on what kind of cream it was on it, which I couldn't discern. So again, that would have still fallen under the limit. But again, everybody declares these things, I hope, just to be transparent, even if it is below the target level. And I hope people continue to do that, because I don't think it's a waste of time. As we've seen, the list isn't onerously long or anything. And you know, we need to give public confidence. Thank you.
If only it had come to me, Councillor Tremens, I might have been able to tell you the flavour of the topping, but there we go. I think the broader point that that to continue to keep that declaration is certainly very well received, and I think it certainly is telling to do that. And you know, in one respect, hopefully, in a sense, we will have more when reported to us next time, given that activities have resumed more in person and more direct, and that's what we would expect as a committee. I think would be sort of on our forward plan, where we would probably end up expecting that to go. So, any further member at this stage? No, it's been proposed and seconded then that the recommendations at 2.1 and 2.2 are accepted. Is there any dissent? No. those are then done. Item 15, any other items? I haven't been given notice of any other items at this stage. And just looking to officers in case there's anything that's come very recently. No. In which case, for item number 16, pass to the Vice Chair, Councillor Rudkin.
Thank you, Chair. I'm happy to chair for the rest of the duration. Thank you. Item 16, exclusion of the public and press. The public and press will be excluded from the meeting during this consideration of the following item, it being likely that there will be disclosure of exempt information. I believe Councillor Walmsley has expressed wish to speak on this item.
Thank you very much, Chair. Yes, as the item 17 does relate to me, as colleagues will be clear that this item and hence is being chaired by Councillor Rudkin on that basis. I would make clear that though as the subject of 17, I actually would request that the committee continue to sit in public. I think it's important justice is done and justice is seen to be done. I think there are lots of issues with this report that they'll be asked to consider, and I think it speaks to, frankly, a waste of time that this authority puts this committee through and the trivial nature of elements that it complains about from officers about councillors and their comments on social media, and raises questions upon potential monitoring or otherwise by officers, of members and their social media content as well. In addition, it raises questions based on the tweet of whether or not there is an overuse of attempt by officers potentially to seek to regulate items and content of debate on councillors, which I think strikes at the heart of our democracy. So on that basis, Chair, as I am the individual named and there would not be, in my opinion, any other exempt information or any information under data protection. Given that there are no members of the public involved, there is no individual data, so there is therefore no GDPR or data protection element to this. Would request that the members of the committee would vote to keep this next item in public. And just to make clear for the record, obviously, given that the next item 17, the consequence of this would be item 17 in public or not, I won't be partaking in the vote on item 16. So thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Can I remind committee members that the complainant isn't here this evening and hasn't expressed a wish for it to be in public session? Could I also seek legal advice from legal services on their opinion? Thank you.
Certainly, Chair. Whilst Councillor Walmsley has expressed his wishes, I think it's important for the committee to know that the item does contain exempt information. That's been recorded on the report, and the reasons for it being exempt are recorded on the report before you today. Regulation 42B of the, bear with me 1 second, of the local authorities' executive arrangement meetings and access to information regulations does stipulate that where exempt information is contained in a report, there isn't a discretion actually afforded to the committee, and the committee before which such information is present and where report is being considered with exempt information, then the committee must exclude from the meeting during the item the members of the press and public. That is a stipulation within the regulations. Also, furthermore, as the Chair has indicated, there isn't a consent from all parties, and you do have to consider that there are other named individuals in the report who may not want their personal data disclosed. Thank you, Chair. So if you look at the top of the agenda item 17, it does mention that it's not for publication by virtue of paragraph 1 and 2 of part 1 of Schedule 12A of the Local Government Act 1972. Those paragraphs actually refer to exempt information, so that's...
What is the exempt information in this report?
The exempt information is the name of individuals within the report, and the contents of the report as well. So,
surely most, if not all, have some sort of statutory position. A councillor, public figure, the director, legal services, even yourself hold some position which is a public position. So our, even as councillors as well, fall into the same boat. So surely that is public, in the public domain anyway.
no, it isn't. No, this report hasn't been in the public domain. It has been considered exempt. It's similar to the reports that we consider when we report on the annual report of members' complaints, etc. It does contain details of individuals that is classed as exempt information, and under Regulation 4, as I mentioned, of the local authorities' executive arrangements, the members of the press and public must be excluded from the meeting where a committee is to consider such matters.
Thank you for that. So the proposal is for the exclusion of the sorry. Is there any more speakers? Okay. Councillor Condacor.
Thank you, Vice Chair. I understand that people were interviewed and they gave statements under the impression that those interviews would be confidential to the committee and the hearings. So I understand why this needs to be in private, and if those interviews are routinely published, it may inhibit people wanting to give a full and frank interview. I know when I was interviewed, that interview was leaked in March, and it is important that we do the process right, and these interviews are so that the investigator can actually get an impression. So I understand why they're confidential, but I do ask, if it is in confidence, that the committee's outcome, either 2.2.1 or 2.2.2, whichever the decision is actually minuted, because obviously we don't need to know the personal details, but when these things happen and the outcome is then not recorded for the public to see that whatever happened has happened. So I do ask, if we do go into private session, that actually at least we minute the outcome of the private session without any personal details. I think that's very important for transparency, particularly in light of what's happened in Westminster recently. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Condacor. Councillor Tromond.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not at all happy about this. Councillor Walmsley has been very clear that as the subject of the complaint, he wants this to be held in public session. He's nothing to hide, wants to shine a light on the process and the specifics. I, however, understand that the complainant, who isn't here tonight, hasn't given consent, isn't prepared to give consent, and they are named personally. I find that almost, that thwarts the process, and that's disappointing. I think it's disappointing for us as councillors and the public. I am also a little concerned that somebody who has a vested interest in the outcome of whether this goes into public session or not, who isn't the person being complained about, has also spoken and tried to stop this going into public session. People shouldn't be saying, oh, I don't want to stand behind what I tell an investigator. I wouldn't like the public to hear what I'd actually got to say. Why? If people are relaying accurate information and facts to an investigator, then they ought to be able to stand behind that. And too often we've had, cases where perhaps somebody's spinning a line and one story out there in the public, but having to admit to something different to an investigator. So I'm not best pleased. I just don't know how we get round the fact that the complainant themselves hasn't given their authority and they are named in this report. That's something I'm struggling to overcome, and I'm going to give that some thought while we while anyone else has got something to say. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Tromans. Councillor Beetham.
Brilliant, thank you. May I ask a question in regards to the complainant, person who put forward the complaint? Have what you said to us as a council, while I was confused at the phrasing, have they specifically not given consent for it to go to public? Like, have they said we don't want it in public, or have they said we don't want it in private? Have they given a preference either way, or have they just said no?
Yes,
they've not actually been formally asked the question, so I can't kind of say either way. But the expectation, as this report is on pink and it is exempt, the expectation is that it will be heard in private. They've not been given the opportunity to make that choice.
Councillor Beetham, and then Councillor Condacor.
Brilliant. If I could just come back on that. First of all, I think the presumption of anything in pink paper to be always taken as private should be considered out of council and whether it's procedure, as it is a vote to whether it does go public or private. I can get why. And then second of all, the evidence for witness statements to whomever, I will again ask the same question: was consent for private or public asked? Was that question asked?
Yeah.
Again, no, the question wasn't asked of them. The presumption when they would have given the information to the investigator would have been that their information is being given in confidence. So the overriding presumption there is that the information contained in the report is given in confidence unless otherwise stated.
Councillor Condacor, would you like to come back?
Thank you, Chair. I assume that if we did put this in public, that the complainant could take a case against this council with the Information Commissioner, because there is, it's like if you're interviewed by the police, you do not expect the police to then publish your transcript. So I'm very... Yeah.
Councillor Tromans, point of order.
Thank you very much, Chair. I believe that the Speaker is conflicted out. I'm not sure exactly what we're talking about when we're saying the complainant. The person whose name is on here officially recorded as the complainant, or the person that asked for the complaint to be brought. Which is Councillor Condacor. And I am sorry, but we have somebody who has brought a complaint by proxy, speaking to try and manipulate the process here, and is clearly conflicted out. And I don't think, with your permission and your ruling, Chair, that we should give any weight to those last comments. Thank you.
Councillor Downs, please, and then Councillor Hopkins.
Thank you, Chair. Personally, I think it ought to be in the open, because there's too many people making complaints at the moment at this council. Knowing that, no one's going to know it's me in the public. Look how much we're spending at this council, guys. It's ridiculous on the amount of legal fees and everything else fees. If you're going to make a complaint, I'm sorry, but the accused has always had the right to face the accuser. Where's the accuser tonight? Nowhere. So I'm sorry, but it's got to be out in the public, in my view. So thank you very much, Chair.
Councillor Hockey.
I just wanted to ask Wahida, what are the consequences of this being heard in public session to the individuals named and to the authority?
Yes, please answer.
The consequences are that obviously there could be a complaint both to the ICO for breach of data protection. There could be a complaint in terms of to the local government ombudsman due to the unfairness that could be caused to the complainant and the other parties involved. Possibly a judicial review as well.
Thank you. So the proposal is exclusion of the public and press for the reasons stated. Is there any objections to that? So that's the proposal. Any seconder for that? Any objections? Sorry. Yes, please. So there's two objections for the proposal. Abstentions? So the proposal is carried for the exclusion of the public and press. Thank you. Can we have the line screen stopped and confirmation when that's been done, please? Thank you.